Hi there, I'm Nafisa Latic, and this is Across the Balkans. Today, we are bringing to light a story that mostly exists in the shadows. Gambling addiction is nothing new, but it's not talked about a whole lot. And in Serbia, the scale of the problem is getting worse and addicts are getting younger. Fortunately, there is hope with rehabilitation clinics reporting successful treatments. Katarina Petrovic has this special report for us from Belgrade.
Da nema dobitka, ne bi ni kockao sigurno niko, razumeš? Nekad dobiješ, više puta izgubiš, praviš veći dug koji zanemaruješ, naravno. Bitno je samo da imaš pare u džepu i pucate adrenalin i to je to.
Taj novac, to je najmanji problem u tom celom kockanju. A najveći je problem u što se ti pretvoriš. I onda s tim dođu i dugovi i to kad su kombinuje, to je katastrofa. Da čovjek počinje da bude spreman na sve.
There's a strong sporting history in Serbia, and sport plays an important part of people's lives. But Serbia has a gambling problem. The line between recreational and pathological gambling is getting thinner. Betting shops have been replacing cafes, and sports seem to be followed less for the scores and the stars on the field and more for the possibility of earning money. The situation started getting out of hand in the late 90s with the widely accepted appearance of sports betting and electronic roulette. Now, Serbia is the fastest growing importer of slot machines in the world. There are more than 33,000 in the country, around one machine for every 200 people. There are over 2,000 betting shops, and every second adult has played some kind of lottery. According to the law, the betting shops and casinos must be at least 200 meters away from a school, and minors are not allowed to enter the bookies. Now I'm in front of a school which we just looked on maps is just under 200 meters away from a betting place down the street. And this is unfortunately only one of the many examples in Belgrade and Serbia. The average age of gamblers in the most desperate stage of addiction here is between 23 and 25 years old. More and more young people are checking into rehab clinics. I'm going to visit one such clinic in Belgrade to meet some of the gamblers getting treatment for their addiction.
Kocka je definisana kao bolest kontrole nagona. Osoba ima poriv koji mora da ispuni i koji je svesna toga da je to štetno po nju i po okolinu. Ali to je jače.
Jel možeš da mi objasniš zbog čega je toliko lako navući se na kocku?
Kocka u suštini je adrenalinska zavisnost. Vama ona osim novca, fiktivnog novca koji vi negde dobijate kada dobijate, nudi taj adrenalin. To kockari zove ili pukovnik ili pokojnik. To je neku brzinu, neku jačinu emocija. Znači, nivo adrenalina koji se luči tokom kockanja nivou kao da doživete saobraćajku.
Jel kod nas u Srbiji izražajniji problem sa zavisnošću od kocke nego u drugim zemljama Evrope, na primjer?
U svakoj zemlji gde je kriza i gde je ekonomski loše stojimo i gde su ti politički prevrati, dolazi do eksponencijalno rasta kocke. Kocka je negde indikator lošeg finansijskog stanja društva. Deca počinju kocku već sa 13-14 godina i vi sa, recimo, 200 dinara užine koje dobijete, uplatite tiket, dobijete 1002 dinara i to stvara kod u dečijem mozgu jednu vrstu lake zarade. I onda svi se polako i tako kreću sve većim ulozima i sve više i više počne dobijaju i gube, naravno.
Da li misliš da postoji nešto društveno, geopolitički što utiče na problem zavisnosti od kocke kod nas u Srbiji?
Pa evo, prvenstveno agresivni marketing. Da li si primetila da jedna utakmica, da je jedan, recimo, posle ponoći film ili bilo šta nema reklamu za kladionicu? Pritom uključeni su u kladionicu sve javne ličnosti koje prosto po modelu su negde idoli mladima kako treba se ponašati. Pa ako jedan uspešni sportista reklamira tu i tu kladionicu kao super stvar, dete koje ima 15 godina, trenira isti taj sport, zašto ono ne bi krenulo ako njegov idol u tom sportu to radi?
Počeo sam kao klinac, 14 godina, to je Krenulo s tiketima, nije svakodnevno. Posle to preraslo, naravno, krenuli su aparati, puštali su nas tu u kraju jer nas znaju. Posle je krenulo online, to je onda katastrofa. Možda igraš od kuće, zanemariš baš sve totalno. U prevozu, na poslu, svuda. To je ludilo. Kocko sam svakodnevno svuda. Gde stigneš, kad nabaviš lovu, kad imaš, kad nemaš. Čak sam i bežao iz škole da bi se kocko. Tiketi, pivo, alkohol. Klasika, srpski mentalitet. Tu nas 20 iz kraja prosipamo fore, pucamo pare i nismo ni svesni toga. Posle kreneš da se zavaljuješ, onda juriš da vratiš, pa i to je trka.
Hoćemo da pričamo o tome od koga si pozajmljivao novac.
Od koga sam stigao. Na primjer, upoznam te, dobri smo 5 dana, ja te zovem i pozoveš lovu. I naravno, tu je uvek priča spremna, mogu da te prevarim kako hoćeš. Ne mislim prevarim, ja te ubedim da ti treba meni da daš pare. Isto mi menjaš na autu, nemam za bebu. Svašta se tu lagalo, nije se marilo ni izrast. Čak je tu bilo i na kamatu se pozemljivalo, pa se dovijalo, vraćalo. Ali to nije ništa strano. Ja sam zanemario porodicu, decu, 2 braka, propao mi 1 brak zbog kocke. Sve samo zbog kocke. Non stop sam buljio u telefon kad sam kući, jer nisam mogao mnogo da bežim od kuće u zadnje vreme, ipak 2 dece sa 1 ženom, 1 s prethodnom alimentacija, uvek je jurnjava za par. Meni je dug skoro 30.000 evra sad. Ja sam vraćao dugove 5 puta u životu. To se skupi 10-15.000, uzme se kredit, pozajmi se od familije, od prijatelja, kod svih izgubiš poverenje. Nemaš, znaš, nemaš druga, niko ne veruje, niko ne shvata da si ti bolestan i da ti čini magreću uslugu, da ti pare na zajam, ti vratiš, ti kao dođeš na nuli u glavi, jer ja sam uzeo nekog da vratim dug koji sam pre toga uzeo nekog, znači ja i dalje dugujem novac. A to je u mojoj glavi da ja ne dugujem više nikom ništa. I onda opet napraviš 10-15.000 evra, onda opet i tako iznove. Ja sam 3-4 puta vraćao pare i obećavao i zaklinjao se u crkvi da neću više nikada kockam. Ali to 99% kockara radi. Samo toneš dublje i dublje. Ja nijednom nisam stao da nisam kockao 15 dana. Nigde. Na letovanje nisam odveo decu nikad.
Nikad?
Nikad.
During the 15 years of her practice, Jelena came up with an unusual and very uncommon method of testing the consistency of her patients. She has them take a lie detector test carried out by a detective.
Test počinje, molim te, budeš miran. U vezi kockanja, da li ćeš iskreno odgovarati na moje pitanja danas?
Da.
Da li se ti trenutno nalaziš u gradu Beogradu?
Da.
Od kada si završio sa programom odvikavanja od kockanja pa do danas, da li si se kockao?
Ne.
Od kada si završio sa programom odvikavanja od kockanja pa do danas, da li si napravio nova kockarska dugovanja?
Ne.
Da li si konzumirao bilo kakve narkotike od kada si završio s programom odvikavanja od kockanja pa do danas?
Ne.
Da li si nalagao bilo šta na današnjem poligrafskom testu?
Ne.
Test se završava, molim te da ostaneš miran. To je zaista jedan revolucionaran metod u tom smislu, znači i rezultati su fenomenalni. Čim oni znaju da idu na testiranje, to je ogroman kognitivni pritisak i psihološki pritisak i znači samo to saznanje ih pravi im blokadu da idu u tom smeru. Garantujem da nema toga da on možda ode i da dođe i kako vi da znate da li je on bio ili ne.
Prvi tiket sam odigrao sa 10 i po 11 godina. Igrali smo u nekoj maloj kladionici, bio neki čiča puštao nas tečuraju. Bio neki sto ispred kladionice, tu je mogu, deca ne mogu u kladionici, mogu ispred. I tad sam počeo. Igrao sam vikendom, u principu, dok sam bio mali, pa preko nedelje. veliki odmor odem i otrčimo nas 5 u kladionicu, igra se Liga šampiona, ne znam, i tako nešto. Posle sam u tome video način da ja dođem do novca. Pa mi trebaju pare, pa ja sad mislim, odem pozavim pare, napravit ću ja više. Tu gubiš pojam u novcu, u vremenu, bilo čemu sem da ti dođeš do para, da ti igraš.
Mi smo to zvali Tour de grad, kao, znaš, odeš po gradu i kockaš, menjaš kladionice non stop. Da uletiš u prvu, dobiješ i da dalje, tako to možda potraje celu noć. Najduže sam bio 26 sati u kockarnici. Izađeš bez dinara, nemaš cigarete, ko popiš.
Kad me neko pita da uđem na moj putni tiket, ja sam to redovno radio do skoro. Znači, prolazim, idem kroz grad i neko dete stoji ispred kladionice, ko ja što sam stavio isto je napisan. I reće mi 100 dinara i kao, vidite, možete mi putiti tiket. Skoro vičem, ne mogu. Ne daj Bože da završi kao ja.
Sad je to sve dostupnije njima, mislim znaš ti ispred kladionice u Srbiji, koliko imaš klinaca koji te mole da izađeš, čekaju da ti daju listić napisan već na papiru da mu ti odigraš tiket. Ti ne bi verovao. Vidiš 2-3 stoje, čiko, možete mi uplatiti tiket, a im nije 7. i 8. razred završio.
Si iskren, imaš strah da može da ti se ponovo desi da kreneš to da radiš?
Uvek sam u opasnosti da se vratim tome i tako treba da pristupim problemu, ali sad da kao se plašim da ću se tamo vratiti, ne plašim se. Jer jednostavno znam gde sam bio i šta sam radio i jednostavno to neću dozvoliti sebi nikada više.
Pukao mi je film jedno veče i došao sam kod žene i seo i rekao, slušaj, ja ne mogu više ovako, non stop presipam i šupljegu prazno, lažem tebe, živim dvostruki život, znaš, ti navikneš da lažeš. To ti je normalno da lažeš, a ti možda u srži nisi takav čovjek. I onda sam seo pred ženu, ona počela plače, naravno, i rekla mi je da je sutradan planirala da mi kaže da se iselim iz kuće, to mi je drugi brak. I onda smo našli, pozvali smo SOS centar. Ne možeš ti to sam da iskontrolišeš po meni, a i zbog porodice, razumeš?
The way the government has acknowledged the scale of the problem is that all betting shops are required by law to educate employees on the warning signs of addiction. 40% of profit from overall legal gambling goes to local charities, and an internet filter blocks foreign gambling games. But that's more about protecting Serbia's financial interests than preventing addiction. More and more young Serbians are experimenting with gambling as early as puberty, thus opening the way to addiction. According to research by Serbian Institute of Public Health, many who gamble had their first encounter with this vice between 10 and 14 years old, and most often in a betting shop. Every fourth person under the age of 26 is at risk of developing a gambling problem.
Angela Merkel has made her final trip to the Balkans as German Chancellor. The world's most powerful woman is also regarded as the embodiment of European stability and solidarity. She's always been a vocal supporter of the EU expanding its membership, even though Croatia was the only Western Balkan nation to join the bloc during her 4 terms. In a moment, I'll ask what the future without Merkel holds for the Western Balkans. But first, a closer look at her fond farewell.
Und mein Herz wird auch für diese Region schlagen, selbst wenn ich politisch nicht mehr.
Angela Merkel couldn't leave office before saying bye to the Balkans. And her parting message on what was one of her final foreign tours, Western Balkan nations still have a long way to go to achieve EU membership. But it is Germany's goal that they do so, regardless of the outcome of the German election.
Muss die EU auch Wort halten und nicht immer noch neue Bedingungen sich ausdenken, weil sie selber keine Lust hat, aus innenpolitischen Gründen vielleicht in manchen Ländern den Beitrittsprozess dann voranzutreiben. Das erzeugt Enttäuschung.
And the disappointment in the region is growing. Despite all the promises made by EU leaders in the last decade, Croatia is the only Western Balkan country to have joined the club. Serbia and Montenegro have begun negotiations, North Macedonia and Albania have had the start of their accession talks delayed following a veto from EU member Bulgaria, and Bosnia and Kosovo are still on the list of potential candidates. Any progress the Western Balkans was making towards integration has stalled due to the EU's apparent loss of interest in enlargement and the years of diplomatic turmoil the EU faced as Britain left the bloc. But during her 16 years in office, Merkel was one of the leaders that stressed the geostrategic interest of including Balkan countries in the EU.
Da, Angela Merkel je bila nesumnjivi I jeste nesumnjivi lider Evrope I ona je bila jedna od retkih koja je mogla da podigne slušalicu I da pozove bilo koga od nas I da utiče na događaje u regionu. I mi smo osjećali I obavezu I odgovornost ne da slušamo I da nekom drugom služimo, već smo osjećali odgovornost da budemo ozbiljni I da uvijek vodimo računa o miru. Angela Merkel jeste politički autoritet koji smo želeli uvijek da čujemo.
Back in 2014, Merkel launched an initiative known as the Berlin Process. It was supposed to speed up the entry of Balkan countries into the EU. During her farewell meeting with regional leaders, Merkel stressed the importance of cooperation and patience with the process.
Ich habe noch einmal deutlich gemacht und möchte das auch hier tun. Der Berliner Prozess ist kein Ersatz für die Mitgliedschaft in der Europäischen Union. Die Beitrittsverhandlungen jedes einzelnen Landes finden statt. Die Länder sind auf einem unterschiedlichen Status.
However, some countries have given up waiting for the bloc and are taking matters into their own hands. Albania, Serbia, and North Macedonia created their own mini Schengen area in July, the so-called Open Balkan.
Nuk ka Open Balkan asgjë brenda që kontradikton me procesin e Berlinit. Përkundrazi, është marrja në dorë e procesit, pa pritur që një herë në vit të mblidhen diku të tjerët për ne, apo që disa të tjerë në Bruxelles ta bëjnë këtë punë për ne.
The importance Berlin attaches to the Balkans was renewed with Merkel's farewell visit. And yet, while visiting Belgrade, it's impossible not to notice the increasing presence of other powers like Russia and China. And despite all Merkel's efforts in the past, trust in the EU is slowly but surely fading away, leaving a very difficult task for the next German Chancellor.
Bodo Weber is a senior associate of the Democratization Policy Council, concentrating on the Western Balkans, German and European foreign policy. He is in Berlin for us. Thanks so much for your time, Mr. Weber. You are quite an expert on this topic. I'm really lucky to discuss this with you today. With Angela Merkel leaving, how different will be a approach from the strongest EU country, Germany, towards the Western Balkans? And what do we know about the opinions and stances and approaches of Armin Laschet and Olaf Scholz about the region?
Wow, thank you first for having me. Yes, this is a very urgent topic. Ms. Merkel is leaving after 15 years or 16 years of chancellorship in which she really had seized leadership within the EU and the West, one could say, on the Western Balkans, on various levels and various initiatives. And there's a lot of worries in Europe, but particularly in the Western Balkan region, where there will be continuity. I would say to your question, there are two aspects. One is we unfortunately, and that's about concluding about her heritage, her role had been weakening over the last couple of years, and on many initiatives where she had really moved the EU forward on enlargement, keeping the membership perspective open, on the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue, on the regional initiatives, the so-called Berlin process, things had started to move in the last 5-6 years in the opposite, wrong direction. So in a way, one would say what is needed is not continuity under a new chancellor and a new government, but a reset of German EU enlargement and Western Balkan policy, a stronger policy, starting with picking a fight with French President Macron, who has basically undermined the enlargement perspective and who is genuinely against enlargement.
Right, and one of the reasons why the Balkans is shifting away from the EU, we've heard that in our story just before you, and for this rise of disappointment in the EU is the slow progress when it comes to the accession talks. Many in the region were angry when Merkel did not stand up to French President Emmanuel Macron, blocking the North Macedonia and Albania, as you recall. So the fact that the West didn't show the lack of unity when it comes to its approach to the Western Balkans didn't help. Why do you think the EU countries can't agree on how to proceed with the enlargement process?
Well, I mean, first we have to let me remind you that since the euro crisis, 2009, the world economic crisis, we and the EU being in permanent crisis mode, which made on the other side the crucial, the dominant role of Merkel within the EU as the crisis manager. There is enlargement skepticism, and there is this legitimate question of whether the EU needs to reform itself internally on the Eurozone, but also on other issues, the problem with illiberal member states that's really questioning the union as a political union, a union of democratic values with Hungary and Poland and other countries in the meanwhile. So whether, the EU is ready to receive more countries, I would say that a lesson that at least, and that made the important leading role of Merkel is that she, like others, like I also and my colleagues advocate, understood that the EU doesn't have that luxury, of saying we're going to first reform the EU internally and then do enlargement. So it needs to be done both at the same time, because if we drop the ball like we did more or less over the last 3 years with discrediting, undermining the credibility of enlargement and thus of the EU in the region, we will see a return to unfulfilled nationalistic agendas, instability, and ultimately more, maybe even ethnic violence and crisis.
Then let me bring in Bosnia and Herzegovina now. One of the latest moves that Merkel did was appointing the new High Representative Christian Schmidt, a new UN peace envoy. Was this a signal that Merkel thinks she is leaving unfinished work in Bosnia, that Bosnia is still an unstable country that needs more Berlin's presence in the future?
Exactly, I would say so. I mean, this appointment, this nomination had become a big mystery to many people in the region, in Bosnia itself, in Western capitals. Primarily because Bosnia was one of the countries where Merkel had been engaged from time to time, but not in such a lead role with such a decisive initiative like it had been the formation, establishment, let's say in 2011, 12, 13, of the political dialogue Kosovo-Serbia, the EU-led one. So Germany, in particularly Merkel, has left unfinished business. And my understanding is that this, exactly as your question pointed to, was a kind of awareness of Merkel on her way out, that she has left a lot of unfinished business in the Balkans, but particularly complicated and challenging Bosnia. So, the idea to appoint Mr. Schmidt, as it came directly from conversation between Mr. Schmidt himself and Chancellor Merkel, obviously was related to such an understanding that Germany needs to, or she needs to do something, what she can do before leaving office, or as she's leaving office, to keep Germany on the Bosnia issue. So in a way, this is at least hoped by Mr. Schmidt and Ms. Merkel, that this will guarantee that the next chancellor, whoever that will be, and apart from coming back to your original question, Ms. Baerbock, I don't see that neither Mr. Laschet nor Mr. Scholz really have the Balkan on their radar, let alone Bosnia, that this, role of the former minister of the Merkel government would be a kind of, bind for the future government to stick to the region. Now, the only problem that I see that is left here is that was the problem with the Merkel policy towards Bosnia throughout the whole last 15 years, is that she did not engage, or Berlin did not engage on a strategic level. We are lacking a strategic long-term EU and Western policy on Bosnia. That's part of the reason why this a vacuum occurred over the last 15 years, and which led to this permanent crisis in the country. So on top of Mr. Schmidt's nomination.
Okay.
And one of the tasks of Mr. Schmidt in engaging with the future German government is to push Berlin future government on an initiative on a real long-term comprehensive strategy for an EU Bosnia policy.
Okay, Mr. Weber, a lot of unfinished work after Angela Merkel, a tough job for the next German chancellor to balance all this. A lot of challenges in front of Christian Schmidt too. But thank you so much for helping us understand all this. Bodo Weber, there, a senior associate of the Democratization Policy Council in Berlin for us. Thanks again for coming in.
Thank you for having me again.
Thanks for watching this episode of Across the Balkans. See you next time. From me and the team, bye-bye for now.